games to be played. Another demonstration of that power and the traction that the NBA has all over the world. We take it as read. There's no point in going over the background, the status of the NBA. This is probably the first in sporting history, a global league based in a single entity, well, in North America rather than a single country, I guess. So what I'd like to start with is to ask you what the trends are within that, in terms of globalization, but within the global makeup of the league itself. I know that the NBA has always been very proud of its metropolitan mix of players from all over the world. What's the direction of travel as far as that's concerned right now?
No, thank you, Kevin. Clearly, we've seen an incredible and rapid growth in the number of international players in our league over the last 20 years or so. Last season, we had 108 players who were born outside the United States from 42 different countries. Just for perspective, in 1992, in that season, the season of the Dream Team, we had 23 international players. So nearly 5 times the number of international players, and that number's just been growing steadily over that time.
And are there any sort of geographic trends within that? I mean, I'd say players coming out of Africa has been a thing for a bit.
There are. I mean, if you think about geographically, out of those 108, about 2/3 of them come from Europe, actually. But the number one country of players, international players outside of the United States, comes from Canada. And, we talk about this influence of players, and you go back to establishing the first NBA franchises in Canada some 21, 22 years ago, and a player like Steve Nash, who had a 20-year Hall of Fame career, and that inspired that next generation of Canadian player. And now Canada leads all countries in terms of the number of international players in our league. But the continent of Africa also has 12 international players. France, Australia are seeing 8, 9 international players. So they're coming from all over the world, quite frankly.
Indeed. And we've seen that sort of stardust that can be sprinkled by leading players right here in China with the whole Yao Ming story and the legacy of that story, the things that are happening in Chinese basketball at the moment as a result of it. But what other examples are there around the world of individuals who have achieved that prominence and profile through their NBA careers having a dramatic impact on basketball in their home nations?
Yeah, I go back to the decision of FIBA back in 1992 to allow NBA players to play in the Olympics. And I'd say that was a seminal moment in the growth of international basketball and the growth of the NBA. One example I love to use is Tony Parker, who was growing up a young boy in France at the time. He was so inspired by Michael Jordan that he decided to play basketball. He decided to bounce the ball instead of kick the ball. Yes. Because at that time, if you were an athlete, Tony probably could have grown up to play professional football, right? Professional soccer. But he was inspired by Michael. And the reason he wears number 9 is because that was Michael Jordan's number on the USA basketball team. And so, Tony was inspired by that. Dirk Nowitzki, Pau Gasol, Steve Nash, they were all inspired by that dream team and that depth of talent. And it caused them to fall in love with the game of basketball. And we're seeing now a thread from that generation of players to this generation of international players. Players like Giannis Antetokounmpo, Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons from Australia, Kristaps Porzingis. And so there's a direct thread from how these players, including a player like Yao, have inspired future generations of basketball players.
Yeah, and somebody like Tony Parker, I guess, is now into club ownership back in France and is putting something yet again back into the overall picture.
That's right, and so many of we've talked about this, so many of our former NBA players going back and running their federations, right? Whether it's Yao or Andre, Vlade. So we're seeing those players come into our league, inspiring other generations of international players, but then also going back and having significant contributions and growing the game in their respective countries.
Sure. So let's talk about China for a little bit. This is where we are now. As I said, you've got, remind us, who are the teams that are here? It's
So the Sixers and the
76ers,
Mavericks,
yep.
correct. And on those two rosters, there will be 15 international players on just those two rosters alone, including a Chinese player in Ding.
Yes, sir. So what qualitative difference does it make to the experience of basketball fans in China? Bearing in mind you can only get 25,000 people, whatever it is, into the arena. The fans are watching the NBA on television in a nice morning times slot, I think. So what qualitative difference does it make having the teams actually here? How do you make the most of the engagement around that?
Yeah, no, it makes a huge difference for us to bring these games directly into countries. So in the last 40 years or so, we've had about 200 international games that we've staged outside of the United States. And these games will be the 25th and 26th games since 2004 that we've actually had in China. More than half of our NBA teams have actually traveled to China to play games. And we kind of, in the U.S. and in North America, we take it for granted that we can go watch an NBA game live. Here, this is the opportunity to see the best players in the world playing in a live experience. And all of us who are associated with the game of basketball knows that it's such a intimate and fantastic viewing experience. You can't get closer to the action than in a basketball game. And so we bring that live game experience, but it's not just about the games themselves. It's about all the activity that goes on around the game. So our NBA Cares events, where our players are out in the community engaging with fans in those communities. Our partner activation. We have 17 marketing partners this year who are activating, running consumer promotions all throughout the season leading up to these games. So these games serve as almost an all-star game. They've got a big event feel to them because there's tons of activation around it. We have a fan appreciation day, which brings in another 15 to 20,000 fans who don't have access to the game. So it gives us opportunities to engage with the community and showcase our players and showcase our product to the fans here.
Okay. There is something about the relationship between the NBA and world basketball generally, which is unique. There's a continuing discussion, and I'd just like you to maybe explain your take on a relationship which, on paper, would look to be destructive. It would look to be, can you be a fan of this and that? Are you taking fans, are you taking eyeballs, are you taking commercial engagement in a particular country away from the domestic leagues and what's going on there? But the reality seems to be very, very different.
It is. No, the reality is different. Our goal is the same as everyone's goal in here, and that is to grow the game of basketball, to make basketball the most popular sport in the world. That's our goal. And I would say that one of the things that has been discussed here has been working together as a basketball family, working across stakeholders, bringing in the right partners, federations, leagues, all to grow the game of basketball. And we have tried to do that, and we have done that. We work very closely. Obviously, our partners at FIBA have brought us in, right? Sure. We're the first time that a non-federation has become part of the family. We have worked with federations, including the Chinese Basketball Association and Yao Ming right here in China, to grow the game of basketball. We've worked with the Spanish Basketball Federation. We've worked with federations throughout Africa, throughout South America and Latin America. So literally all over the world, we are forming partnerships to grow the game of basketball, whether that's at the grassroots level or at the very elite level. Yeah.
Well, perhaps we could talk about some of the specifics within that in relation to China, as that's where we are.
Sure. So, for an example, we have this model, a basketball pyramid model, where in order for players to play at the highest level, they need to start someplace. And so, as has been talked about earlier, we know that the most diehard fans of the NBA, there are a couple of things they have in common. They all played basketball before the time they were 12 years old. Right, so they all played basketball, and they all played basketball before they were 12 years old. So we've been working with the Ministry of Education here in China on a grassroots junior NBA program. And this upcoming season, we will be in 4,000 schools in 31 different provinces, reaching 4 million kids. And we've come in and we've worked with them to train the trainer, to train coaches on how to teach the game the right way in their actual school systems, elementary school, middle school, and high school. And that's a program that we're doing. We're also working with Yao and his team. We hosted the national team, the Chinese national team, in the U.S. during our summer league programs. We have coaching and referee exchange programs with Yao and with the CBA. And right now, as a matter of fact, 3 CBA teams are in the U.S. playing preseason games against NBA teams there. So that's all part of the way that we work with, one example, China, but I can point to several other examples around the world of working with federations, working with local governments, all in the interest of growing the game of basketball.
Sure. Now, as I remember it, and I'm getting on a bit now, and the memory's going a little bit, but when I first became involved with the business of sport, which is a way away, the NBA already was getting building a reputation for innovation and being early adopters of technology right across the piece. And certainly digital technology, the internet, even in its relative infancy, was something, if I remember correctly, you had an office, a Chinese language service online. As digital technology has developed, how is your approach to using it to build this global brand development?
Yeah, I go back to the vision of David Stern some 30 years ago, and then the continued vision and implementation of that through our commissioner now, Adam Silver. And David had this vision that we should be a global sport, that we should export our product. And one of the reasons that he came to China some 30 years ago was to hand CCTV VHS tapes to say, put this on the air, right? Because that's how consumers were consuming sports and consuming content at the time. He claims he didn't charge CCTV for it. He said, here you go, I'm giving this to you for free, just put it on the air. And that is how the China market got exposed to the NBA. Today, the way that consumers and fans are engaging with content is through digital media, is through social media. And we have a partner in Tencent, for example, who's also the partner of FIBA, who is terrific at getting live games out. We have over 400 live games that are distributed on Tencent's digital platforms. And all 1,300 or so NBA games are available to Chinese consumers through our partnership with Tencent. Around the world, we have 1.5 billion likes and followers on social media platforms around the world. So the way that consumers are consuming their content today, whether that's sports content, entertainment content, it's through their mobile phone, it's through their digital devices. Sure. So we need to ensure that we're on the cutting edge of that and making our product available to them however they're consuming.
So that's getting the product there. Any particular innovation in the way that product is going out, rather than just the platform?
Sure. I mean, so there's a couple of things we're doing. One is we started understanding that more and more consumers and fans were watching their product on a mobile phone. We now started capturing those games in a mobile view format. So tighter angles, so it's optimized for when you're watching it on your screen. Traditionally, people don't think of that. People just shoot games and film games the way that you would for television. We're now actually shooting them for mobile devices. The other thing that we just announced this season is that we're now taking the live game product, and we're saying, if you only want to watch the fourth quarter, you can buy the fourth quarter. Or if you only want to watch 10 minutes of game action footage, you can now do that. Instead of saying, I want to buy the whole game, well, you may be willing to just buy that last fourth quarter. Now we're providing you with an option to be able to do that.
So it's what they always said about the internet from day one, that this is micropayments, giving the choice would actually come home to roost at some stage. We're coming towards the end of our very, very brief time here, but it's clear that the philosophy of the NBA is about growing the market. And there are very few brands, I would suggest, if you look across all sorts of business and commercial sectors, which have gone out, been dominant in a market, and has been as well respected by what otherwise might be their competition. So what I'd like you to do in the time that is remaining to us is perhaps share some insights into the factors that have contributed to the continued growth of the NBA, and which might apply to the people in this room and their federations and their leagues. A couple of takeaways maybe that when they get back into their offices on Monday morning, hey, we really ought to think about that.
Look, the one thing I would say is there's no substitute for hard work, right? This doesn't happen by happenstance. This takes a plan. And I go back to the 10 factors for success that Patrick put up earlier. Having excitement, having engagement, being very passionate about your product. You have to be passionate about what you're doing. You have to have that vision. You have to have a plan, and you have to execute against that. And then specifically around the game of basketball, I think it is investing in our youth, investing in coaches, because what I find is that the talent and the desire of kids out there who play this game, it's there. What's often lacking are the resources, the coaching, the opportunities for these kids to play against better level competition. That is what I think we, as federations, as leagues, need to continue to invest so that we're giving these kids, giving the next generation the opportunity to realize their full potential in the game of basketball and in the game of life.
Which is exactly what this summit is all about. Mark Tatum, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for that. Mark, thank you. And now to continue with our strand dealing with clubs and leagues, I'd like to welcome to the stage to introduce his panel, the editor of Sport Business, Mr. Ben Cronin.